Well, good evening. Some of you here today and online may not know why the Theosophical Society takes such an interest in education, and you may not know what we mean by the Theosophical movement. So I'll begin with a very brief history. The Theosophical Society was founded in New York City in 1895 by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, William Quan Judge, and Henry Steele Olcott. You see Henry Olcott over at the right, with the long white beard. Other people were involved with founding the society, but it would never have happened or become an influential worldwide movement without these three people. Over the years, the original society split into various bodies that altogether are known as the Theosophical movement. These various offshoots of the original TS agree broadly on certain principles or objects. This is the wording used by our own Theosophical Society in America. To form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. To encourage the study of comparative religion, philosophy, and science, to investigate unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in man. Each of the founders had something to say about education. Madame Blavatsky wrote in The Key to Theosophy about how children should be taught. Here's an excerpt. We would endeavor to deal with each child as a unit and to educate it so as to produce the most harmonious and equal unfoldment of its powers, in order that its special aptitudes should find their natural development. We should aim at creating free men and women, free intellectually, free morally, unprejudiced in all aspects, and above all other things, unselfish. Henry Olcott, an attorney and journalist, was the first international president of the TS. He worked with Madame Blavatsky to establish the headquarters in Adyar, India. Olcott was not so concerned about educational theory, but he worked to create access to schooling for the poorest children, and especially for girls. He wrote, "Surely the future of any country or race lies in the hands of the mothers of that race. Parents might plainly see that by withholding education for girls, they're deliberately dwarfing the capabilities of future offspring." William Quan Judge, also an attorney, was vice president of the TS and worked diligently to organize the American section. He wrote and lectured extensively about theosophy and had this to say about education as self-development. All education, as distinguished from book study, is based on the belief that we can and should work into betterment and not merely drift into it. Excuse me. Okay. The earliest involvement of the TS with education was in 1886, when Colonel Olcott began establishing schools in Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. At that time, English missionaries dominated the educational options on that island. Buddhism was severely repressed. Many poor children had no access to schools. Olcott worked with local Buddhists to build schools and brought American, English, and Australian Theosophists to help organize them. He left a legacy of about 200 Buddhist schools in Ceylon, where he is a national hero. These schools were grounded in the local language, customs, religion, and culture, rather than trying to dispense theosophy or Christianity. Olcott was aiming to provide a service and not to proselytize. Ananda College in the capital city of Colombo is a prime example. Charles Leadbeater, Fritz Kunz, and other Theosophists served as principals and teachers. Kunz established an infants department, which is the youngest children, run by his two sisters, and brought in his brother-in-law, a mining engineer, to upgrade the science curriculum. Ananda College is still an important institution in modern Sri Lanka, with 8,000 boys in 13 grades. Mahinda College in Gala is another boys' school that has been hugely successful for over 100 years. And Museas College is a prominent girls' school. Colonel Olcott was concerned about the outcasts in India. They were also called Panchamas, Dalits, Harijans, or Parayars, pariahs. Initially, staff members were Westerners because Hindu teachers refused to teach students, considering them to be untouchable. Olcott established 5 schools in South India. Maria Montessori wrote of them, "I am very much moved by the most beautiful way the school is run. The moral training is based on the same principles of oneness of life or brotherhood of man as my own principles for children." Here is the Olcott Memorial High School today, operating since 1894 at our international headquarters in Adyar. Olcott was joined by many American and British Theosophists in establishing Hindu schools in India, paralleling his efforts in Ceylon. After he died in 1906, Annie Besant, his successor as president, carried on this work. She was very active in the Indian independence movement and saw Indian education as a high priority for creating generations of Indians who could bring their country into a full equality with the other modern nations of the world. She wrote, "The great aim of our education is to bring out of the child who comes into our mind, our hands, every faculty that he brings with him, and then try to win that child to turn all his abilities, his powers, his capacities to the helping and serving of the community of which he is a part." The educational approach of these schools was that native religious traditions were preserved or restored. Education was facilitated for girls and outcasts as well as for boys. All religions, castes, and cultures were treated with respect. Native-born teachers taught religion, language, and art suitable to the local community, while Western teachers offered modern educational methods and taught science and business practices. Nationalism was encouraged, but along peaceful lines. Mrs. Besant founded Central Hindu College and its associated schools for boys and girls in 1898 and headed that initiative for 16 years. She met Maria Montessori in 1907 and they became fast friends. Theosophists followed Dr. Montessori's teachings with great interest, and by 1918, there was a class at Central Hindu Girls' School using the Montessori Method shown at the right. Mrs. Besant also helped to form the Theosophical Educational Trust in 1913, and then the Society for the Promotion of National Education in 1916, to support development of schools based in Indian languages, religions, and customs. These organizations were staffed by Theosophists, but not affiliated with the TS. Within 2 years, they had 9 colleges and universities under their supervision, along with 30 primary and secondary schools, and had begun developing and printing educational materials. One of the prominent colleges arising from this movement was the Wood National College in Madanapalli. that is now called Besant Theosophical College. Irish Theosophists James and Margaret Cousins worked at the school. Dr. Cousins was the principal, and Margaret, a classical pianist, served as music teacher. They're in the middle of the back row in that photo at the top. He has a kind of a bow tie. As a side note, the Indian national poet Rabindranath Tagore was visiting for a few days in 1919, and Mrs. Cousins worked with him to set his poem to music, creating India's national anthem. The original English translation is framed in the college library. Here are a few more images of education in India. Physical activities were always part of the curriculum. And this shows how schools were creative in using local materials to advance education. These boys are building a model of a modern harbor out of sand and wood. Meanwhile, another educational development was taking place in the United States. Catherine Tingley was the charismatic leader of a large branch of the Theosophical movement in America. Am I touching something?
It's the cloth.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Tingley and other Theosophists established a Raja Yoga school for children in 1900 at Point Loma, near San Diego. A Theosophical University followed in 1919. Other Raja Yoga schools operated briefly in Germany, Sweden, Minnesota, Massachusetts, and Cuba. Madam Tingley said, "I called the college Raja Yoga because that means the kingly union of mental, spiritual, and physical development, aimed to return to the pure ideal of Greek simplicity. A child at Point Loma is taken as a precious, wonderful entity and developed as such." Students came from many countries, and there was a rich multinational atmosphere there. No tuition was charged for the poor. And the educational approach was that school focused on intellectual formation and moral and spiritual development. Boys and girls followed the same curriculum, which was not at all common in those days. But they were separated in most classes except for music. The arts, music, drama were especially emphasized. All children learned to play musical instruments. So they had quite an orchestra. The school was residential, and even children whose families lived in the Loma Land colony also boarded with their classmates. Children spent a great deal of time outdoors. The university taught liberal arts, Sanskrit, science, philosophy, and theosophy. Here's an early view of Point Loma buildings. They were rather spectacular. And a classroom under one of the beautiful domes. This shows some of the group homes, and below are some of the Cuban children who were brought in after the Spanish-American War. Here's the orchestra and a performance of A Midsummer Night's Dream. And marching, uniforms, and celebrations were very much part of features of life in the Raja Yoga Academy. And now over to Europe for Maria Montessori, the brilliant Italian physician who developed the first great independent school movement. A group of bankers asked her to find a way to occupy the children of poor people in the San Lorenzo tenement in Rome. The first house of children was opened in 1907. Her acclaimed success led to a rapid expansion of the method throughout the world. She said, when the child is born, he has no special language. He has no special religion. He has not any national or racial prejudice. The child incarnates in himself the environment where he finds him around him and constructs a man adapted to survive, to live in those surroundings. These are some elements of her educational approach. Fantasy is postponed until the child is grounded in reality. Tasks and activities are reality-oriented. The intellect or absorbent mind is engaged early. Children are free to choose their own activities. Manipulative materials are designed to be aesthetically pleasing and to support very specific educational goals. The atmosphere is calm and productive. The teacher works as a facilitator of independent learning. Socialization begins with respecting the space of others, and older children voluntarily assist each other in learning. This is an early school in Europe. In 1939, Dr. Montessori and her son Mario were invited by the Theosophical Society president, George Arundel, to live and teach in Adyar, where they could be safely away from the fascism in Italy. Montessori spent most of the next 10 years based in Adyar, working in South Asia. A palm leaf hut was built at Adyar for teacher training. Here are some photos of the Montessori's visiting classrooms. And a modern Montessori preschool today. These are from Montessori high schools. Rudolf Steiner was active in the Theosophical Society from 1902 for about 10 years, heading its German section, after which he formed the Anthroposophical Society. Dr. Steiner was a genius who made major contributions in many fields, including agriculture, architecture, Goethe scholarship, and many other things. He said of education, our highest endeavor must be to develop free human beings who are able of themselves to impart direction, purpose and direction in their lives. The need for imagination, a sense of truth, a feeling of responsibility, these three forces are the very nerve of education. The original Waldorf school was established in Stuttgart, Germany in 1919. The owner of the Waldorf Astoria cigarette company invited Dr. Steiner to educate the children of factory workers and managers together in the interest of peace and social justice. Steiner trained teachers and had all grades operating in a matter of months with a complete and cohesive theory of child development. These are some of the elements of Waldorf education. Imaginative play is the work of young children. Reality is gradually introduced during the early years. Toys are made of natural materials designed to stimulate imagination, such as lengths of silk, wooden blocks, and plain dolls. The curriculum is concerned with developmental stages and unfolding consciousness and age appropriateness. Storytelling and fantasy are used to convey concepts. The atmosphere is one of beauty and harmony. Early cooperative activities foster social development. Emphasis is placed on the rhythms of the days and the seasons. Children are engaged in a spiritual journey, learning the inner realities of the physical world. Waldorf education, like the Montessori Method, has grown into a huge international movement. They use completely different approaches in the early years, but my observation as a parent is that by the time students reach 5th or 6th grade, the methods are much more similar. The results are excellent for both. This is a typical preschool classroom in a Waldorf school. Here's another preschool and grades classroom. And here's a musical performance, and across the bottom you can see a class performing eurythmy, a dance movement developed by Steiner. Over at the right you see some of the faceless dolls, very simple dolls that can be fruitful in bringing out the children's imagination. Now back to another school movement, Krishnamurti schools. Jiddu Krishnamurti is best known as a philosopher and as an inspiring spiritual leader, but he's also keenly interested in education and established several schools around the world. He said, "The purpose, the aim, and drive of these schools is to create the right atmosphere so that the child may develop fully as a complete human being. This means giving him the opportunity to flower in goodness so that he rightly related to people, things, and ideas, to the whole of life." As a young boy, Krishnamurti was discovered by Theosophists and identified as having potential to be a great spiritual leader. Annie Besant became a mother figure to him. He was privately tutored in Adyar and had opportunities to travel and find education in Europe and America. In 1929, he broke with the Theosophical Society and pursued a different path of spirituality. Here are some of the principles of Krishnamurti schools. School focuses on the development of the whole human being. Students learn to observe the world and act in the world without conditioning or self-centeredness. The school tries to establish an environment in which this kind of education and self-development can take place. Faculty work together to develop themselves as human beings who are capable of maintaining the educational environment. There's no fixed curriculum or method. This is the Brockwood School in England. Rajgat Besant School in India. And the principal there said, "Krishnamurti education is an experiment in right living." Here are some of the other Indian schools. And this is the Oak Grove School, situated in Ojai, California, on land purchased by Annie Besant for Krishnamurti. Theosophical schools have existed all over the world for various lengths of time. Communities have come together to create special schools in Australia, New Zealand, in England, the Netherlands, Poland, Java, and the Philippines. In Ojai, California, the Besant Hill School was established by a mixed group of Theosophists and others, along with Krishnamurti, in the 1940s, on land, once again, that Annie Besant had purchased for that purpose in the 1920s. There have been several attempts to establish theosophical universities, and always huge energy has been put into adult education. This is the general approach to theosophical education, but many local variations have existed. Concepts central to theosophy are subtly emphasized, such as unity of life in a universe filled with energy and consciousness. Humans as energetic beings with a complex constitution. Spiritual evolution, cyclicity of time, interconnections of religions, philosophy, science, and arts, freedom of thought and belief, responsibility for one's own spiritual development. Self-awareness, meditation, yoga, and spiritual forms of the arts are usually taught. All activities of daily life are suffused with spiritual meaning. Schools are tailored to local populations, offering arts, crafts, and languages that are culturally appropriate. Teacher training programs were established in several countries, notably India, Ceylon, Java, and the Philippines. Here are a few glimpses of theosophical education. One large initiative was on the island of Java in the Dutch East Indies, now called Indonesia. 15 Arjuna schools were thriving in the 1920s and 30s with a teacher training academy, but most closed during World War II. One school remains active today. Fritz Kunz, you may remember, was an early principal of the Buddhist Ananda College in Ceylon. He worked with Annie Besant, was a close friend of Krishnamurti. One of Kunz's concerns was the fragmentation of knowledge in the 20th century because of a materialistic worldview and over-specialization in academic disciplines. I wonder what he would think of the 21st century with social media and the internet, but he died in 1971 and never experienced any of that. He wrote, "The solution for our problems must lie in a philosophy of education that is spiritual and metaphysical in essence, but thoroughly justified from beginning to end by its method and its scientific content. For only a philosophy of this kind would be acceptable in secular educational systems such as now prevail." In the late 1940s, he established the Foundation for Integrative Education. A stellar group of scientists, scholars, and businesses work together to improve education by including philosophy, religion, and art, along with modern science, in a cohesive curriculum. He organized lecture series, conferences, and seminars exploring new ways to integrate knowledge so that students would experience interconnectivity and wholeness. The name Fritz Kunz is not well known, but his ideas had an impact, and I know of several academics who are writing about him now. The latest big educational development in the theosophical world grew in the Philippines. Vic Hao Chin has been heading up this effort. He said, "It is important for a school to have teachers who are psychologically active, creative, and free. They themselves are not afraid to ask questions and hence tend to integrate their own understanding of life. A wholesome school, then, must be able to prepare students to meet the demands of an adult life in terms of career, social skills, self-mastery, self-awareness, clarity of values, and an integrated philosophy of life." Golden Link College offers preschool through college classes, has 5 bachelor's degrees, 2 of which are in education. Sunshine Montessori Learning Center, the Besant School, and the Lumen School are part of a growing system operated by the local Theosophical Society. Five years ago, the Golden Link model was used to develop a new school at Theosophical Society headquarters in Adyar. Here's the Adyar Theosophical Academy. Someone who has much more knowledge and time than I do could make an elaborate comparison of all these educational systems and movements, their attitudes and methods. There are many concepts to explore: the unfoldment of human potentialities, personal responsibility, brotherhood, the energy present in a classroom, the student-teacher relationship. That's beyond my scope for tonight. However, before I close, I want to look at one special aspect of educational systems, that is teacher training. In Point Loma, the Raja Yoga Academy had teachers who were highly educated and thoroughly grounded in Theosophy, but there was no structured teacher training there. The well-being and spiritual life of teachers was very important. And after a session in the classroom, a teacher was expected and encouraged to spend time out in nature for personal renewal. All of these other systems I have mentioned would be sympathetic to that viewpoint. In each of them, teacher training is spiritual training. Development of teachers as human beings is considered vital in Waldorf teacher training, for example. A Waldorf teacher ideally stays with the same class from grade 1 through 8, experiencing a spiritual journey and growing with the children. Vic Hao Chin conducts self-transformation seminars for his teachers and for other groups all over the world. He has done that here. In Krishnamurti schools, in Waldorf schools, in Montessori schools, in Theosophical schools. Faculty members work together to develop themselves as human beings. In both Zen Buddhism and the Hasidic Jewish tradition, there's a saying that the student does not go to a master to listen to lectures, but to see how that master ties his shoelaces. Rudolf Steiner said, "You have no idea how unimportant is all that the teacher says or does not say on the surface, and how important what he himself is as teacher." That sounds very much like Krishnamurti. As a society, we must learn how to nurture school staff so that a teacher's spiritual core emanates in the classroom and is demonstrated in all his actions. The effect will then ripple throughout our civilization. Receive the children in reverence, educate them in love, and send them forth in freedom. Rudolf Steiner said this, but of all the educators mentioned today, which one of them would not concur? Thank you.